Okay. Is it? No. Is it? Is it picking me up? Yeah. Okay, so hello and welcome to the Changing Places launch event. I'm Councillor Angela Moran. I am the Deputy Exec Member for Finance and Resources and the Executive Lead for Social Value at Manchester City Council. On behalf of the Council and the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, I'd like to thank everybody here and online for joining us today to officially launch the Changing Places New Directions in Social Value report, which has been produced by CLES and funded by Manchester City Council. Today's event is an important one for us as place leaders and policymakers. It's about how we take social value into the next phase against a challenging economic and social backdrop and ensure that it continues to be a powerful force for positive change in our city and beyond. Before we come to the report, I just want to thank the People's History Museum for hosting us today. As a museum that in its own words exists to explore the radical stories of people coming together to champion ideas worth fighting for, I think we can all agree that it's a fitting venue to discuss social value. Manchester City Council has a very proud history of social value. Our commitment to social value began in 2007, 5 years before the Social Value Act came into force. And today, as a local authority, we have the highest social value procurement weightings that we're aware of in the country. But despite our strong record, we recognise that there is still much more to do. In fact, this very reason is why we have this report. Last year, CLES and Manchester City Council led a series of events for how local authorities and other organisations can push the social value agenda further. The report summarises the findings of these workshops and summarises them in 5 new directions for how local authorities and other sectors can inspire the next phase of social value. We'll bring to life the recommendations of the report via a panel discussion with leaders in the public sector who are already getting on with delivering this next phase. But before we do this, I'm going to hand over to David Birch, Senior Researcher at CLES, who's going to run through the background of the report and also set out the recommendations. David.
Thank you, Angela. Let's test this. Clicker's working, very good. So thanks, Angela, for that introduction. Today I'm going to talk to you about this report that we've published, some of the sort of key findings and ideas in it before we go into this panel. First of all, let's get some basics. So a phrase about social value is you get 10 people who work in social value in a room and ask for a definition, and you get 11 answers. So we're going to add a definition to the mix. We're going to keep it very simple. And we think of social value as just a broader understanding of value beyond cost. So it's something that's been enshrined in law, as Angela mentioned, for over 10 years, Social Value Act. And in terms of how it's delivered, it's delivered by integrating those priorities of a local place through the activities of that organization. So how service is delivered, how resources are invested, whether that's how we spend money, whether that's how we recruit people and employ people, and how we sort of use land and assets. So because it touches on those things, it's a key tool of community wealth building, which we'll come on to in a minute. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page, that's what we mean by social value. In terms of why social value and why now, we all know that you just have to look outside the window and on our streets to see the multiple overwhelming challenges that we face. It can sometimes feel that way, but realize I'm going on to the next slide. There we go. So yeah, our era is defined by these huge challenges, whether it's widening inequality, whether it's climate breakdown. So social values sort of emerge from this as a force, as a way to create some good, to create inclusive growth that is not dependent on extra money from central government. It's about using the resources that we have and targeting in a certain way to produce benefits for our society and our economy and our environment. Oh, need to forget clicker. I'll keep the clicker in my hand so I don't forget the clicker. So in terms of where social value is now and some of the challenges we face with it, that we all know that our councils are skint. They've got no money for, whether that's you know, it's a decade of austerity. You've had COVID, increased demand. They're under intense financial pressure, and we're seeing these sort of bankruptcy notices. Councils actually unable to deliver the services that they need to by law, and we're worried that with that there's going to be even more of a pressure on social value. It's seen as, oh, that's a nice to have. But actually, you know, it's just going to be the sheer fundamental things that a council needs to do, prioritizing financial needs over these broader societal concerns. And secondly, another challenge is that there's a huge industry around it now. There's, you know, literally millions of pounds of money to be made in creating various social value measurement systems and so on. So there's this issue that some of these very nuanced social dynamics can be simplified, and actually, you know, there's a sort of very rigid way of measuring social value. A lot is lost in these rigid frameworks. So how do we get around that? Because the unintended consequence of that is that you've got the types of businesses that we want to have in our public sector supply chains, whether that's SMEs, whether that's VCSE organizations, lose out because they're very bureaucratic, they're very complex. So it's about how do we sort of get around that challenge. And also, taking a step back, social value we think is a way of restoring public values back into public services. So seeing it as a sort of antidote to the decades of price first outsourcing that we've seen sort of over, say, previous decades, but especially with the last sort of 10 or so years of austerity. So with all that being said, forgotten the clicker again. With all that being said, we're thinking, we've developed these 5 directions, and we're seeing the directions as pathways that public sector organizations, other sort of anchor institutions in place can take to directions they can take to shape social value in their place and push on from the way that things are being done at the moment. So the first direction, we've called it keeping it and making it mission critical. So what we mean by this is having really strong leadership and political prioritization of the agenda. So you need people like Angela, elected members, you know, really championing this agenda. But it's not just elected members, it's also senior officers and people within councils, within colleges, within universities, really get the social value agenda and spreading it down to the people that they work with. That's a really key success factor we've seen in all the places that CLES works in. Social value frameworks, again, setting out what exactly you want to deliver when you're talking about social value, and then how that leads into the things that you're asking of suppliers when they're bidding for contracts and delivering contracts. And weaving it through everything that you do. So this is setting social value frameworks, and a clear policy is about that setting clarity of purpose. And we think a lot of places are doing that very well. But on the second 2, that there's doing it less, they can do it less well. And that's where we think the importance of governance really comes in. You know, governance is quite boring but very important, and it's about how we get that across an entire organization. So there's a case study in the report around how Manchester City Council are doing it with a sort of cross-departmental group with lots of task and finish groups and different agendas, whether that's around social value and procurement and monitoring, evaluation, but also other things like how what we'll come on to in a minute about social value within other areas of council activity and so on. So that's the first direction. The second direction is around thinking outside the procurement box. So it's often seen as a procurement agenda. You know, if a head of procurement is into social value, they're doing that, good, job done. That's what a lot of organizations think. We think, no, actually you need to broaden out the number of people in an organization who are thinking about social value and using it in their day-to-day job. So that's throughout the life cycle of spend, whether you think about commissioners designing specifications for goods and services, but also you know, in the delivery, for instance, you've got contract managers. Those are the enforcers, really. When you've got suppliers who've committed to things, we need to empower them to really understand what this agenda is, why it's important, and so on. We also think that spend is just one thing that a council does, and think about social value more generally than just beyond procurement as an agenda. So we've got a couple of examples in the report of thinking about community wealth building in its wider sense. What an anchor institution is, yes, it spends lots of money, but it also employs lots of people. How can we create social value through a progressive recruitment policy? Yes, it controls lots of land, either through ownership of land or through the planning process. So how can we use the planning process, land ownership, to try and generate social value for a community? The third one is called, we call it looking outwards. So this is about how a local authority or another public sector organization, it's their role in shaping the local economy and shaping markets within that. And part of that we think is really important, came out in the workshop, is around brokerage. So it's about the interactions between the public, private, and third and VCSE sector. So it's about understanding their strengths, it's understanding their limitations, and also the power dynamics between the three, and having a more nuanced relationship and brokerage between those three sectors, because often when they have been put in, when they've worked together, it's often been framed through competition, but it's about how can they complement each other and work together so they're greater than the sum of their parts. There's also some examples in the report around what we call social licensing and sort of ethical employment codes. How can councils take more of an active role in markets and actually shape markets and say, you know, if you're not doing X, Y, or Z, we don't want to work with you. And there are powers in the new procurement legislation that should make this less legally difficult, sort of legally speaking. So that's really something that's of interest going forward. The fourth direction is around measurement. So we all know and love or hate social value measurement. It evokes very strong feelings in different people. And a lot of people think, okay, if we're good at social value, that means we measure it and we've got a pounds and pence figure and job done. But what we're saying is, no, that's not how it works. Actually, the numbers are important, obviously. You need KPIs to ensure that you're doing things, you can communicate it. But a key issue is that there's been too much of a drive on the numerical side, and everything has been focused on numerical side. There's these rigid frameworks we spoke about, and there's a gamification of the system. So how do we sort of step back from that and, yeah, make sure you have KPIs that are relevant to your place, but also combine that with measurement of impact. So get those qualitative stories. These are really sort of complex social dynamics that you're trying to intervene in for better outcomes. So how do we capture that? Because you sure as hell can't capture that through a KPI of how many jobs or how many this. You know, that's important, but it needs to be a part of a bigger piece. If nothing else, because that's a really good way of communicating why this agenda is important, not only for sort of external, you know, general public, people, taxpayers, but also internally within all the people who we said, you know, important for enforcing this and making it a cross-departmental agenda. So the last one is around networks and leveraging networks. So anchor institution networks are, you know, fairly commonplace now. Several have been running for quite a few years, and we've seen really good success, and talk about it in the report, the sort of ICANN projects that have come out of things like that all across the country. What we're interested in is kind of going beyond that and thinking about the wider anchor ecosystem. So that's those are the organizations like sort of business support, the VCSE sector more generally, DWP, pre-employment, employment partners, often sort of place-based, and thinking about the organizations that tap into those anchor institutions and can really sort of level up and expand the impact that our anchor institution network can have. And there's a really interesting case study in the report around that, where that's played out in Birmingham and Manchester as well, which we'll get onto during the panel. Oh yeah, and also the last point here is around funding, and funding is so important. As I said, social value is around what can we do sort of within our means, within the finances we have, but we need to make the point that that a council is not just an organization delivering services, but it's also working for broader outcomes, and it needs long-term funding to be able to deliver those broader outcomes, because it is changing local places in doing this gender. So that's a very quick run through of the key reports. I think just to conclude, it's clear that we have these huge challenges in our society, and therefore there's never been sort of a greater need for something like social value. And yeah, I hope this report sort of gives clear responses and pathways that organizations can take to sort of put these into action and sort of change what they do. And just to say it's time for bold action, and really hope that this report can move past the stage where some people think social value is just buzzwords or it's dry metrics, and it can actually help to change things on the ground for people in all places. So with that, I'd like to thank you and then pass on to Sarah, who will lead a panel that you'll see above you. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Can I ask the panel members to come on up? Well, while we're just getting settled, I'm really excited now to be able to have a conversation with our panel about the report and to get their reactions to it, and also as well to hear your questions and comments and reflections, both in the room and online as well. So as we talk through the panel's reactions to the reports, it would be great for you to start thinking, well, what am I interested in understanding a bit more about, and what does the report, what kind of thoughts has the report prompted in my mind, and how does it kind of perhaps resonate with my place or my organization? So that's your homework whilst we kick off the panel discussion here, and we've got a brilliant panel here this afternoon to explore the report, very much drawing from the case studies in the report itself. So let me just briefly introduce the panel. So we have Sarah Griffiths from the Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. We have Matthew Duran from Manchester City Council, and we've got Alice Mumby from the Number 93 Wellbeing Centre. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you've all had a chance to look at the report. I'm just going to start really by asking each of you what your reactions have been to the report and how it's kind of resonated with your experience, particularly of the work that you've all been involved with in North Manchester. So Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Hi, thanks. Really nice to be here. Is that working? Marvellous. So I'm Sarah Griffiths. I'm the North Manchester Strategy Lead, and I sit in a partnership team that works across NHS organisations and the local authority in Manchester, focusing on our place-based work in North Manchester. And I say that because my interest is really about how we do this at place level, which comes through clearly in the report. So for me, my interest is in the ingredients that we need to kind of make this happen amongst a whole host of organisations, that wider ecosystem that came up in the previous introduction. So for me, this is about who's in a place, understanding the needs and aspirations of a place and really thinking through how social value can help to deliver those aspirations for our communities and also then have mutual benefit for a whole host of organisations. So that's what spoke to me from the report.
Great, thanks.
So I work on a major regeneration program called Victoria North. We're working with a developer partner to regenerate large areas of North Manchester. We're aiming for 15,000 new homes over the next 15 to 20 years. The report really, for me, as David says, you only have to look around to see the great need for this kind of thing at the moment. But in a city like Manchester, at the same time, the opportunity has never been greater to deliver social value. And that comes as a result of decades of investment and intervention into shaping urban regeneration in Manchester. You only have to look around at every crane on the city skyline. That represents a massive opportunity to leverage social value into Manchester communities. I think the report highlights a couple of really key points for me. One of them is knowing your priorities. So being clear about what social value is, but being clear about what your expectations are in terms of how you want to leverage that social value. What would you need it for? What are the kind of place-based priorities to leverage that social value investment? And then second to that is the point around having networks and partnership working. Like as a local authority like Manchester, we're in a very fortunate position with the investment that we see coming into our city. We can't deliver on that social value agenda on our own. We need to work in partnership with those like Sarah and the NHS trusts, but also the voluntary and community sector, the local business network. We've got an established business forum in North Manchester. And I think that's really important in this day and age. We can talk a lot about resource constraints and financial constraints, but there's a massive strength in working in partnership with those other place-based leaders.
Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, I think it's really positive that there's a bigger focus on social value. In North Manchester, there's been high levels of deprivation for many years now, and that's only got worse after the pandemic and cost of living crisis. I work for Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust, and my colleagues have been involved in the build of the new inpatient unit at North Manchester General Hospital. And at the beginning, they had discussions with the contractors, discussed the social value plan with them, and suggested different community organisations that they could support through their social value commitments. And luckily, Number 93 Wellbeing Centre was one of them, which is based in North Manchester. Now, obviously, I work for Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust, so I had an advantage, but I think that's why it's really important that the North Manchester Brokerage Service as well, to make sure that the smaller voluntary sector organisations, which aren't as well connected, can be linked up to suppliers to make sure that they benefit from the advantages as well. However, I'd also like to mention that the Wellbeing Centre does host quite a lot of voluntary sector organisations, so I like to think we've passed on some of the benefits to them as well.
Great, thanks, Alice. I just, before kind of bring in the questions from online and from the floor, I wanted to ask a question about, all of us in this room, probably at different stages in the journey around place-based change. And I know from some of the conversations that we've had at CLES, it can sometimes be difficult to bring partners on board with this, and there can be kind of a little bit of resistance or perhaps uncertainty. What would your advice be in terms of how to kind of make the case and how to kind of bring people together to kind of tackle those sort of shared priorities? I don't know who wants to jump in first with a thought on that.
Well, I suppose if I'm holding the microphone, I mean, just to explain, I've not been involved in the procurement side of things. However, I suppose it's just emphasising, the demand that are on voluntary sector organisations at the moment. They're under so much pressure, and really try and reach to people's hearts when you're talking to them about the poverty levels are just so extreme in North Manchester, and I'm sure in other cities as well. And so public sector organisations that can influence private sector companies to make changes, it's really important that they do that. And I think most workers in different suppliers will also see the need for that as well once they you visit a community, it's quite obvious the problems that exist. So anything that they can do to help take the pressure off under-resourced voluntary sector organisations that are often scrabbling for funding is really important.
Yeah, and for me, I think the report talks about making it mission critical, and I think that's really important. Clarity of purpose and what it is that we're trying to do and why we're doing it. In North Manchester, the approach we took was to work in kind of collaboration with our partners to develop a social value framework, which we could share with partners, with contract partners that are commissioned to deliver some of the major schemes in North Manchester. And what that does, it frames the objectives, it frames the key themes that we're looking for. So we want social value activity to be delivered across education, employment and skills relating to health and well-being, to build community resilience, which is really important, and also across digital and zero carbon. Across all of those themes, the framework sets out the opportunity, the local context, making it specific to North Manchester and some of the specific challenges it has locally, but also the kind of outcomes that we want to see delivered across those different priority areas. And in sharing that framework with our contract partners, with those working on those programs at North Manchester Hospital and Victoria North, those contractors are able to shape and tailor their social value activities to identified local need, to make sure that that's delivering maximum benefit to local communities. And the feedback that we've got from those partners has been overwhelmingly positive, because they're all asked to deliver social value. And some of these are multinational companies that will be delivering social value activities off the shelf in London, in Cambridge, in Scotland. We want the ones in Manchester to be tailored towards an identified local need. And I think that clarity of purpose has been really, really, really positive for us so far.
Thanks. And I'd echo what's been said about clarity of purpose. And I guess just looking at it through a slightly different lens, when we embarked on this journey several years ago, we started by looking at how statutory sector organisations in the first instance could collaborate around a common purpose, really recognising the need that Alice has described in the north of the city, and some of the kind of health inequalities with obviously sitting in the NHS. That's one of the things we're particularly interested in playing a part in solving. So we were very much looking at how can we collaborate to turn the dial on those outcomes. And of course, the way you do that is by looking at all of those other things that influence a person's health and well-being and the social determinants of health. So our work through the North Manchester strategy is really looking at how we can partner in place to use our collective influence as anchor institutions to bring in a wider range of partners. So Matt's talked about the construction industry. We're also working with academia and housing providers and the voluntary sector to kind of come up with creative solutions for some of this work. And how we can do that in a way that both meets as I said before, the aspirations of our local communities, but makes the case for this beyond it's the right thing to do for our communities, but it's also the right thing to do for organisations that are looking to improve population health outcomes. And with that comes organisational benefits around, levels of need and so on, and helping to kind of move towards an early intervention prevention agenda, which we know is so important for the NHS strategically. So, you can look at this through different lenses in terms of what helps to kind of bring people together, but that common purpose, that hearts and minds piece is really the nub of this, which won't be a surprise to anybody kind of participating in this event. But in practice, I think that's the thing when the going gets tough. That's the thing that keeps people together and focused on what we're trying to do.
Great, thank you. I want to bring in some questions or comments from you in the room. And Helen, are there any questions online that you'd
There are loads
like
of
to-
questions online. People are really going for it. So do you mind if I come in with one of the online questions first?
Go for it.
We can go to the floor. So Lynn Sproat, who's from NHS Ayrshire, has asked, in terms of procurement, what can the public sector do to help suppliers move beyond looking at the quick wins, at the easy stuff, and actually to the more profound stuff that has a more formative and changing effect on local economies?
Okay, Sarah, do you want to take that one?
I will give it a go. So I think one of the things that's really encouraging to me actually in the work that our partners have done on this agenda is a real focus. So Matt talked about the social benefits framework, and one of the themes in there that's really clearly articulated is around education, employment and skills. And we see a whole range of participation from, not just suppliers, but our local business network has signed up to this framework, as well as the statutory organisations. And that ranges from, careers events, job fairs, mock interviews with our schools and colleges, all the way through to having construction skills centres located in the developments themselves to really open up pathways to work for individuals. When we are looking at where we want our social value impact to be, one of the elements of the framework that I think is really important to us is that we have geographical tiers within it. So it won't be a surprise to hear that we're particularly interested in residents in North Manchester feeling the benefit of what we're doing in that part of the city. But that benefit, we recognise, reaches out into the north of Greater Manchester and beyond. So there's kind of concentric circles here where we know we can have an impact. So not only does the framework focus our minds on the themes and priorities that we want to focus on, but it also really gets us thinking about how we root this in place in different geographical levels. So embedding that in all of kind of, procurement practices and so on is key, but it's about reaching out into established activity as well that's taking place as part of people's day jobs.
Yeah, I think that from my point of view is so important that this isn't, like an add-on or an extra. It's kind of integrated into the existing system. Questions in the room? Yeah, okay. We'll take if there's one here. Have you got any other ones? Yeah, one here. So maybe if we take these two questions first.
Hi, I work for a large construction business, and we are committed to that mission critical social value. But we often come across contracts in which we're asked to make commitments before we get the chance to do a needs assessment on the ground. And so what advice do you have for us when having that conversation to challenge those commitments that are given directly to us, to say, can we take a moment, can we do a needs assessment?
Okay, thanks for that. And there's just here, just Jonathan, yeah.
Hi, I am George. I work for the Big Life Group, and I've got a question and a comment, I suppose. One question is around how do you, when Matthew, you were talking about wanting to tailor what you mean by social value and what matters to communities. Do you have advice on how to go about gathering that information and kind of engaging communities in deciding for themselves what social value means? And the second one is really encouraging in the paper and in the presentation to see a focus on the full life cycle of a spend and to ensure that social value encompasses that full life cycle. But actually, I'm interested to get some thoughts on how you can ensure that there's actually legacy value beyond the life cycle of a spend, and how you can build that in and make sure that people delivering services or work are kind of committed to leaving something behind after that work is finished.
Great, thank you. Two great questions. Matthew, do you want to kick us off on those questions? And then I don't know, Alice or Sarah, if you want to come in.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, in terms of the question you asked, I think that's really good that you do that local needs assessment, because not every construction firm would do that. Like I said before, there is a lot of off-the-shelf social value activities that are rolled out from place to place, but recognizing that there are specific local challenges is really important. So, I mean, I can't answer for other places, but that's what we've tried to do with that benefits framework. We've tried to make sure that the commitments that we're asking you to do are grounded in local needs. So we've done a lot of that assessment on your behalf. I think in other places where that doesn't happen, I think you're free to kind of push back and challenge some of those commitments that are being asked of you and why you're being asked those commitments. I think that's really important. But definitely carry on what you're doing in terms of doing those local assessments. In terms of the follow-up questions, I think when we developed that social benefits framework, we started looking at that in 2020, I think. And we tried to build on a platform of things that are already in place. So Manchester City Council's got numerous strategies coming out of our ears. We've got, a strategy for the city. We've got digital strategies, zero carbon. So we looked at the findings of all of those, and we tried to drill down into North Manchester. Well, what's specifically relevant here? But we also built on work that others have done. So in 2019, the council and about 12 partners from across the voluntary and community sector, from local businesses, from the NHS, did a sort of inquiry into the state of the voluntary and community sector in North Manchester. And what we found is that it's much more fragile than it is in South and Central and other parts of the city. So one of the findings of that was we need to build community resilience in a place like North Manchester. So we embedded that as a key theme within our framework. And it means that we can go to contractors and say, like, what are you going to do to strengthen community resilience in Manchester? How are you going to, you know, donate some of your time, your expertise, your skills, not just financial donations, but other things to help strengthen those networks in terms of business support, financial planning, and things like that. And then just to answer your last question, as part of that process, we've got big contracts on North Manchester General Hospital. We've got massive contracts in Victoria North. What we try to do is adopt a kind of consistent set of indicators that each of those contractors are expected to report on. But much more than that, we want those contract partners to push each other and to challenge each other. So some of those areas like zero carbon, the easy social value thing that a contract will say is, well, we'll do a community litter pick in the local park, and it kind of ticks that box. But it doesn't really. It doesn't go as far enough as we want it to go. So how do we talk about air source heat pumps and thinking about green skills and getting into local schools to get them thinking about the economy and how we're going to transition to the zero carbon future and things like that. So we do the indicators and we report on those on a quarterly basis, but we also look at the data and what does the data tell us? Because this is the full life cycle of the programme. The major regeneration work in North Manchester is 15 to 20 years. So as one contract ends, another one's just about to start, and there's going to be multiple overlapping contracts. If what we've set out, the outcomes that we want to see, if we're going to deliver on them, we need to be tracking this over the long term. So every year we'll do like a data analysis of life expectancy in North Manchester, on health and heart conditions, on smoking prevalence, but on things that look at employment and education attainment, and the zero carbon, the digital measures as well. And we can be tracking those. Some of these are long-term gradual changes, especially when it comes to health and well-being. But we want to be able to look back in 10 or 15 years and say, what we set out to do in 2020, how far along the journey are we? Have we been able to leverage that social value that actually makes a long-lasting legacy change in the communities in North Manchester?
Can I just ask a follow-up on the kind of those questions, and in particular that point, how do you kind of build those relationships with your contractors, their supply chains, so that people are able to understand what's expected and what support they can get to help to, because it may be some companies may have, you say, off the shelf social value policies that they can tailor. Other companies may be, much smaller, may not have the same infrastructure. How do you kind of work with contractors to support them on this kind of journey?
I'll just, sorry, I know I've given the answers to the other question as well. I'll just give a brief answer to that. I think the first thing is that the commissioning agents are well networked and have a good relationship, so that we're consistent with the message that we're giving to our contract partners, working across the place. But what we tried to do in North Manchester is actually we created a social value subgroup which brings together the contractors working on the different projects. And that's out of a lot of their comfort zones, because, some of them want a competitive advantage or want to be the best at doing social value and things like that. But actually what we've tried to get across is this is 15 to 20 years. We want to see long-lasting change in North Manchester. We want you to be sharing best practice, sharing your ideas. Certainly those areas like zero carbon, where I said the default is let's do a community cleanup. Let's push each other and challenge each other to do something different. And I think that's quite, it shouldn't be particularly innovative, but it wasn't being done before we started to do it.
Alice or Sarah, have you got further thoughts on the questions or that point about contractors?
Not so much about the contractors, although I would say with your comment about doing the needs assessment, with respect to people that work in project management offices, you're not always as closely connected to the community as the frontline community workers that might be more aware of the smaller voluntary sector organisations that were desperate for some changes, but they might be so busy, like an amazing debt advice charity, Gateway M40, if anyone can help them, please do, in Monsell. They don't bother with social media because they're, totally yeah, they're so busy helping people in debt who are really struggling and probably preventing a lot of suicides from happening in North Manchester. So I think, yes, obviously you sometimes are tied to that with your contract, but I think it's also important to, when you do start, to try and speak to local community workers as well, because you might hear a different perspective from them. And with your question before about engaging communities to find out what's needed in the area, I suppose there's a lot of existing groups and partnerships already happening throughout the city. There's often, like in Cheetham Hill and Crumpsall, there's a VCSE group that meet quite regularly. I'm part of the North Inclusion Partnership, which is a mixture of voluntary sector organisations and statutory workers. And it's talking to them, because often they'll have all those answers for you, or they can talk to the community easier because they've already developed those relationships with people, and people trust them and they feel more comfortable speaking to them, and things will come up naturally. For example, I was at a debt crisis meeting yesterday, and there was a lot of passionate people there, and there weren't that many statutory organisations, but people were kind of chatting about how they feel, and people might be a bit more guarded with certain organisations.
Any other questions? Yeah, just want to yeah.
Hi, so my name's Dee. I work for Manchester Council. I think it's fair to say that the North Manchester development is kind of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in terms of the scale of it and the length of time. Would you have any advice for people that are trying to replicate some of those partnerships, but on a smaller initiative?
Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good question, and I think we recognise that the unique kind of set of opportunities that have come together in North Manchester has given us a stimulus that doesn't exist in many places. I think for me, the I mentioned earlier on the kind of the ingredients of all of this and finding the common purpose. I think what I've seen increasingly as this work has kind of got going is that, yes, it's about the opportunity that's coming and the kind of additionality that's going to bring to this part of the city. But the real strength of our partnership working and the progress that we've made to date has really been about how we've then kind of gone away and built that back into the day job in everybody's organisations. So for me, it's about how you find the kind of the thing that partners in place can convene around. What's the common spark that interests all of you, that speaks to your organisational values, or the thing that you're trying to achieve? And that doesn't have to be lots of cranes in the sky, as Matt talked about. It can be any number of things. So going back to the question earlier about the kind of life cycle of spend, one of the things that I'm increasingly interested in is that actually it's to the point in the report about thinking outside the procurement box. This isn't just about spend. This is about how we use our collective influence. And if we look to something like the Health Foundation's anchor framework, what that talks about for NHS organisations is that, yes, how you spend your resources, in local supply chains and how you employ local people is really important, but it's also about environmental stewardship. It's about how you use your assets to support community resilience and some of the challenges that Alice has described. It's about how you act as a convener in place. So none of those things necessarily rely on having a kind of, a redevelopment opportunity. Those things can happen as part of core business, but it's about how you articulate that and how you find your coalition of the willing to kind of build momentum around that agenda. I think we're very fortunate that we have, a lot of people who are kind of the same mindset when we think about, our partnership goals. But it's finding those first few to help build the platform from which you can then expand.
Yeah, great. We've got another question online.
Online, so
Well, do you
the
want to give us?
pressure is off in the room, I would say.
Do you want to give us a couple from online?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an anonymous one, which is a bit of a cheeky one, because I know, Sarah, that you're going to have plenty to say about this. I'm sure the rest of the panel will, but
I'll try and keep
from
quiet.
a Claire's perspective, are there any examples of local authorities or other public sector organisations working together specifically to develop social value frameworks how's that worked? What would be the benefits around something like that? And also, it's slightly related to some of the questions that we've already had, is like, how much should social value be predetermined at the start of a contract? Or is there more value in shaping social value as needs and opportunities and challenges arise through the life cycle of a contract? I'll leave you with those two.
Okay, great. Alice, do you want to kick us off on that one about, you know, the sort of social value beyond the, I guess, beyond the procurement box, and how to kind of build that? I mean, it's a little bit related to what Sarah was just saying about, you know, that finding that spark, finding that kind of common interest. You know, how do you work with partners to kind of really pull that together? Because it's not necessarily an easy process, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, in North Manchester, there's a lot of micro voluntary sector organisations, and a lot of them don't own the buildings where they're based because they're in schools, churches, community centres. So say if there's a construction company building, you know, a new inpatient unit or Co-op Live, they might say offer some practical support to those VCSE organisations, but they don't have the final say about making changes to the buildings. So they wouldn't be able to benefit from that. But it's about talking to the managers of those organisations and really getting an understanding of what their needs are. So, for example, I've noticed quite a few charities, their websites are really out of date. And I'm assuming that they either don't know how to update it themselves, or they haven't got the funds to be able to get someone else to update their websites. And then that can put them at a disadvantage when they're applying for funding, because if potential funders look at that and they think, oh, well, they're not doing that much, or so thinking of different ways to support VCSE organisations. And then also, like I say, most importantly, just talking to them to try and find different ways to support them. One thing that has been really popular where I work, our centre users are very socially isolated, they live on their own. We feel sometimes uncomfortable asking people how their weekend was, because often people are just at home doing nothing. So Day PM paid for a minibus so they could go on a day trip last year, and people really look forward to it and really enjoy it. And it's really not that much, but it makes a massive impact on people. They're also going to pay for an afternoon tea for a bingo group. And again, people get dressed up for that and really enjoy it. So it's just talking to the community organisations and trying to find out what will help them the most.
Great. And that question as well, I mean, Matthew, Sarah, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, but I think on that question as well about, I mean, I think it's an interesting one, and it comes up a lot in our conversations with people about social value. How much do you predetermine, and how much you kind of grows as a project grows, you know? Be interested in your experience. And
I think that is quite a difficult one. And when we started out with the contracts for North Manchester, we tried to consciously move away from setting arbitrary targets from the very beginning. I mean, you have to be clear about expectations. There's an expectation to deliver social value, but there's a lot of merit in kind of reserving the right to continue to review that as the program develops. I mean, as an example, you know, there's a big priority on young people not in education, employment and training in North Manchester. So it's quite, you know, we could say, right, we want NEETs into jobs, but it's not as simple as that. What we want is to set out the context. We want you to be supporting local people to raise aspirations, to make career connections. That will result into NEETs into jobs. But if we look at just, you know, a target metric on an indicator sheet, after 1 year, there's a 0 in the box. But actually, there might be a lot of other work that's going on, working with schools, working with PRUs, working with voluntary and community sector groups that do outreach with young people to make sure that those sort of pre-employment activities are happening behind the scenes. So we've really tried to think about the supporting activities and not just those kind of hard and fast metrics, number in a box every quarter.
okay. And I mean, Sarah, I'm sure I was really interested in what you said about, you know, finding that common interest and trying to then, you know, take it home with you and embed it into but I mean, I know from our work in Birmingham, that's not easy, you know, and it's, how do you kind of, and also navigating the hierarchies within an organization as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy, but I think where my observation is that the best of the work that's taking place in and around North Manchester is where partners working in that place have taken the time to get to know the place. And, you know, the social value contributions are not just about putting, you know, monetary offers in, but they're getting out and about and installing kitchens and building community gardens and going into schools. And, you know, they're getting to build a relationship and a rapport with local people. And, you know, there is an interest in legacy and the long-term impact and benefit. So, you know, I think, and that has a center of gravity of its own, doesn't it? It snowballs in a positive way. So I think you can kind of build on that. I think to your point about kind of different organizational interests and hierarchies, yes, we're all working within our own frameworks. We're also working in a partnership framework that kind of sits across, you know, many different institutions, and that's not always the easiest to navigate. But I think my advice would be to try and establish a kind of permissive framework in which to work. So if you've got strong leadership, air cover, and the freedom to act within the parameters, you know, that are appropriate within your context, I think that gives the freedom to be creative and to think differently about how you achieve some of this work. So yeah, none of that's easy, and a lot of that comes with time and trust and relationships. But those are the things that, when the going gets tough, that will help to keep things moving, in my experience.
Okay, brilliant. Questions from the room? Yeah, okay, one here. Any other questions? We can take a few. Oh yeah, one, and there's one here as well. So we'll take those two.
Hiya, I'm Emily. I work for Oxfordshire County Council. I wonder if you see any difference in the effectivity of social value policies if they're using the kind of national TOMS framework, or if they've developed their own kind of localized set of priorities. And then if you are using a you know, kind of not the national set, but your own set that you've developed, does that make it easier to apply the social value concept to tenders that fall underneath the threshold in the Social Value Act?
Okay, great question. And gentleman here with the white shirt.
Thank you. Alice has spoke a lot about small charitable organisations and voluntary sector. You spoke a lot of large contractors. How are you engaging with smaller micro businesses to engage, especially with the smaller charities? Because in my experience, they've got the greatest amount to give. They're usually more local, and they've, you know, it's easier for them to engage with the smaller micro businesses.
Yeah, great question. And actually, funny, I was challenged on this recently by a smaller business who was saying, you know, we do so much in our community, but we can't get it valued. You know, the contracts are sometimes quite narrow in terms of what they're looking for, and yet we feel that we've got a lot to give here, you know. So, Matthew, do you want to take that question to begin with?
Yeah, sure. So what we did at the start of our kind of journey on the framework, we held a local supplier event. So we encouraged everybody to come along and to hear what we've got to say. So we talked about you know, what we think is going to be required in terms of social value, in terms of our framework, but we also talked about 15 to 20 years worth of construction activity taking place within their neighborhoods to promote those opportunities that are coming up. And I think it's about time we did that again. It's been a couple of years. But in addition to that, we've tried to, Alice made the point before, we've got like a brokerage service. So what we're trying to do is reach out to voluntary and community sectors, organizations that are quite small, but they need assistance and they need support to help them get on with delivering their bread and butter, what it is that they need to do. So we've set up a sort of brokerage service that kind of matches their requirements with offers of support from some of those bigger contracts, but not just the big contracts, anyone that's working within North Manchester. So, you know, that offer of support could be, we need a new kitchen fitted. That's quite easy for a contractor with the skilled tradespeople to be able to do that. But what it means is that that voluntary and community sector organisation can get on and train people to prepare meals and to get experience of working in a kitchen environment, and gets on to deliver their business. If they don't do that, they've got to get bogged down in developing a business case and writing a funding proposition and trying to leverage in funding. So we try to make sure that there's asks and offers from the very smallest community organization, but the outcome of actually meeting that ask and doing it has a big impact locally.
And I think that also links to what Dave was saying in terms of capturing that, you know, that it can maybe perhaps seem quite small, but proportionally, it has a massive, kind of massive change. Yeah. What about the question about from Emily in Oxfordshire about the effectiveness of your own TOMs versus your own kind of framework for social value? I wonder if any of you had an experience with grappling with that.
So I couldn't claim to be an expert on TOMs and measurement, but it's a live conversation that we're having through our kind of social value working group at the moment. We've kind of been using the TOMs framework to help capture where we've got to so far. That has its advantages and its limitations. So I think it is something that we need to have a think about, and it's the broader kind of, it's good for the monetary kind of value and the KPIs, but doesn't necessarily tell the whole story, as we've talked about here today. So the other thing that we're doing locally is capturing case studies as well, and they span the 5 themes of the benefits framework that Matt described earlier on, and it's a tool to tell a much fuller story, isn't it, about all the kind of cause and effect and the longer term implications that one small intervention sometimes can make into the broader social value agenda. So I don't think it's an either or. I think there's a place for both of those elements when you're looking at the kind of how you measure the impact of social value. I think the other thing I'd say is there's something then about how you tell the story, and we've probably got a bit more work to do on kind of how we celebrate our successes, because again, that brings with it, more opportunity, more interest, more connectedness into the community. So much more to do on that agenda, but I think it's a live one that lots of people are grappling with.
Yeah, okay, great. Any other thoughts from Matthew or Alice on that question?
I mean, the TOMS framework, there's over 200 TOMS indicators, but they are widely used and widely used by contractors and contract partners. So like Sarah said, we've tried to use them, and also the kind of the social value portal calculator uses those TOMS to kind of apply social value proxy indicators, and that can be quite useful in some settings, but not always. It can be quite misleading at the same time. Like X million pounds of social value. There's several caveats that sit next to that number. So yeah, we're about to review the indicators that we use, and I think now that we're 3 or 4 years in and we've embedded this approach, it might be that we actually want to go towards our own bespoke indicators, because that's normal for us to do that. We want to review and see how things are actually worked in practice, and some of those TOMS indicators that we used, they're not really delivering the numbers, but that's not to say that lots of the work in the background isn't happening. So supporting people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness into employment, actually getting a job isn't their first way out of homelessness. It comes several steps down the line. So people are being employed on our contracts, but they're not homeless at the time when they're being employed. So the number against that indicator is 0, but it's not really taking into account everything else that's happened as part of that person's journey.
Okay, great. We've got a few minutes left. Should we take a final from online?
Yeah, we've got a really good online final question. So Matthew Jackson, who some of you may know, asks, what will the social value agenda look like in 10 years' time? And I don't know what's in the drinking water up there in Orkney, because he's obviously feeling very, very optimistic, because he says, will we still need to talk about social value, or will suppliers be naturally delivering local economic, social and environmental outcomes and because they have a greater affinity to place through their day-to-day behaviour?
Okay, good question to finish on, the future. Get your crystal balls out. I'll come to each of you in turn. Do you want to go first, Sarah? I can see you eager to.
Yeah, why not aim high? I think, I would love to see a future where social value is not described as something different. I think it is a core part of everything that we all do as citizens in place. So I think we should be embedding this as much as we can in our core business, and then thinking about where do we need to pay extra attention, where something needs an additional input. So I think that is, a useful thing to aim for, and the right direction of travel in my view.
Okay, great. Matthew?
Yeah, in 10 years, I still think we'll be calling it social value, but I do think we'll be much further along and it will be much more embedded. I think the point is, I think we'll continue to develop these place-based approaches to social value. So whether you're Manchester City Council, where you've got, you know, a development pipeline of, or a gross development value pipeline of £4.5 billion over the next 10 to 15 years, or you've got much smaller economic activity going on in your places, knowing how you want to leverage that investment to make it count within your local communities, that's what's really important.
And final word, Alice.
Yeah, I think everyone will have good intentions to provide social value support while they can, but I think it's important that it's still integrated in the contracts and with the discussions from the statutory organisations, because sometimes with the best will in the world, people might be busy and can let things slide and end up doing something that's an easy option, which is tokenistic, which doesn't actually have that much benefit to the community. So we want to make sure that the changes that are happening in these areas are really going to have a significant impact on the community organisations and the communities that they serve.
I think that's a good end to a good note to end on, really, that point that, you know, it's got to be meaningful, doesn't it? It has to be actually relevant to the challenges that people are dealing with. So yeah, well, look, thanks very much to our panel and to everyone online and in the room for the questions. It's been really interesting. I hope you found it useful for your work as well. So can we just finish by thanking our panel? I'm going to hand over to Councillor Angela Moran for our final session.
Thank you, Sarah. And just to echo what you said, thank you to all the panelists. I think that was a really reassuring and inspiring panel discussion, reassuring to know the scale of what's already been done and also the commitment from each of you involved in delivering this stuff on the ground. Part of my job is to bring the stories of what you're doing to life. So the comments, the questions are really helpful to hear. And also just inspiring and exciting about the scale of where this can go and to get to a place in the future where, as you say, we're not actually designating this as social value. It's just something that we all intuitively do. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Natalie Samuels, who's joining us from Moscow St. Vincent Housing Association provider that works across the Northwest. Sticking with the same theme, Natalie's going to tell us about some of the work that she's doing delivering social value in Manchester and beyond.
Thank you, Angela. So thank you for having me this afternoon. So my name is Natalie. I work for MSV Housing and I'm social investment team leader. Who we are, so we're a housing association. And we have just under 9,000 properties covered across 17 local authorities in Greater Manchester, Lancashire and West Yorkshire. We pride ourselves on being a housing provider that has retained our original values and mission, and we continue to deliver a range of housing solutions to the most overlooked and underserved in society. There's two key values that I would point out in terms of social value that we particularly focused on, and that's focusing on the customer and being kind. And I think in terms of social value, that can be really important as key factors. We've got a proven record working hard over the last 50 years to improve customers' lives, providing not only good quality affordable homes, but also working hard being part of local communities. So the next slide. So MSV and social value. So as David mentioned before, there's probably loads of different definitions for social value. So I won't reiterate that for you. But for us, we're at MSV, we want to sort of make it easy to understand and be relevant and meaningful. So it's clear to everybody what is actually going on. And I think we got that from the speakers earlier before as well. Measurable. Again, quantitative data is important. It's just how we're very keen to get those kind of case studies, those stories, those meaningful, impactful stories that make a difference. And collaborative and sustainable. So social values should be shaped by our key stakeholders and communities and focused on building long-term outcomes and enduring productive relationships with the partners that you've got. So For us, we have a asset-based approach at Positive Future. So I sort of facilitate this space here. So this is in Moss Side. It provides a free and welcoming environment for people of all ages in the community to access resource and support for education and employment. We're particularly dedicated for young people and care leavers to support them to thrive. So where we are there, you can see part of the office, but that site actually has 17 flats as well around it that we're sort of ring fenced for care leavers of Manchester. So we do have young people living on site as well. So our success is our focus. We collaborate with partners to offer a variety of programs, skills development, so training and educational opportunities. Wellbeing support has been sort of key in the community as well, talking about some of the issues that we have, sort of building that resilience is been key from our side. And investing in the future. We believe in the power of education, business, and the environment to shape people's lives. Additionally, we actively seek external funding, again mentioned before, to provide further resources for skills and development and training within the community. So it's a bit blurry, you might not see it. I won't read everything word for word, but we've got particular aims and objectives that we like to focus on. So that includes employment and education pathways. And we do a lot of work with schools and colleges to sort of reinforce what we can do together. Building partnerships, comprehensive employability services, connecting opportunities, and measuring success. So we'll go through some of those shortly. What we've achieved so far. So we've looked at a lot of schoolwork experience and partnered with 5 schools. We've been going for about 2 years, so we've had about 5 schools, and we've got another school starting next week actually, to provide valuable workplace exposure to students. So the way we do that isn't just about, I know for me, myself, when I did work experience, I was kind of like the coffee lackey and sort of just going and making tea and not really trying to get anything out of it. And I think for us, what we try and do is we try and identify people within the business. We'll speak to the school, we'll speak to the young person, what is it they're actually interested in, and try and sort of partner them up and give them that sort of mentorship and guide them. Work clubs, so we've empowered over 240 people through 84 work clubs, fostering job readiness skills. We've held a jobs fair in Moss Side at the Powerhouse, which we had over 200 people attend. Skills development, so supported the acquisition of over 160 qualifications within that 2 years, including ESOL, youth work, and support in schools. And we also do work placements, providing hands-on experience for 15 young people over the time we've been going. As part of the, we've started a student internship at the beginning of the year in January. We were approached by the Manchester College and Pure Innovations about supporting young people who were on supported internships. And we had 5 young people who were who had EHCPs. So they needed sort of more of a therapeutic sort of delivery in terms of how we worked with them. So we had 5 of our experienced operatives volunteer to mentor, providing a supportive environment where the student could build confidence, gain the experience, and develop job-ready skills aligned with their qualifications. Now, one of these lads in particular has been at college for 5 years, struggling to get experience. So this was a perfect opportunity for him to find something that was fitting to his needs. So we completed like a realistic work placement, went through the stages of recruitment to give them that true experience of what it is like to go into the working world. So over the 12 weeks, the students developed valuable skills working within a domestic setting, managing daily tasks, providing excellent customer services, functioning efficiently as part of a team, and reinforcing their skills. And when we had these young people in homes, we had a couple of people contact us and say how impressed they were with the young people and the things that they were doing within the house, and they were talking to the tenants and things like that. So it was really good. As a result of this, so following on from the 12-week, MSV recognised the potential of 2 high-performing students and extended them a 6-month contract. These contracts include comprehensive succession plans to support their long-term growth within the company. So they will be with us now for at least 6 months. We've got plans in place. They're ready to go, as you can see. They did fantastic. And we've also managed to support another one into a placement with one of our partners, GGI, and got him onto an apprenticeship as well. So we also have a community mentor at Positive Futures. I think with social value, I think for us, we needed dedicated people to be able to deliver on some of the outcomes that we needed. We approached the National Lottery grant, and we were awarded £10,000, and we managed to get a community mentor who does 2 days there at Positive Futures. Over that time, we've managed to get 21 people into employment, and of those 21, 13 have been in sustained deployment for more than 6 months. Residents supported towards work, so that's 174 CV support and referrals to external organisations as well. We have community drop-ins, so you may or may not heard of the consumer standards in terms of housing, with the sad passing of Awab Ishak and Grenfell. There's a lot of consumer standards that will be coming in, and we needed to have a place which is a community drop-in for people to actually speak to and access officers. That sort of disappeared after COVID. There wasn't anyone that you could sort of particularly go to. So we're ahead of the curve, and we've innovated by launching several popular community drop-in sessions and look to expand this in the future. And this will have a range of different officers on the day, so you can speak to a number of different officers within MSV. Our community drop-ins offer convenient access to a variety of specialists. And this includes representations from our organisations, along with valuable partners like the police, local councillors and other partners as well, because we think that will also be really important. Jobs fair, so we hosted this, we've got another one coming up. We've been able to put this on in the community. So we also did alongside this a week-long worth of workshops, which help people to sort of develop the skills they needed before actually attending the jobs fair. So whether that was helping them with CV building, confidence building, we partnered with people like SmartWorks to offer them clothing for interviews and things like that. So they were offered a package around this jobs fair, which we'll be looking to do again. So talking about some of the young people that we've worked with before. So the school work experience offer that we have it's aimed at reaching the young minds. We've worked with Rochdale Islamic School, Chiltern, Derbyshire High Schools and Trafford College as just some of the students that we've worked with over the couple of years. So you can see we've done some workshops with them. We've had a staff member attend. We went actually out to Rochdale to deliver their work experience. More recently, we have launched a domestic violence group as well, recognising the need. Our social investment team have partnered with a local church to launch Time to Fly. So it's about creating a safe environment for victims of domestic violence, and they can connect with others facing similar challenges. So we're also going to be doing, while we've got the group, we wanted to offer some other support that was there. So we'll be installing a barista-style coffee machine, providing comprehensive training. So that will cover things like food hygiene, health and safety, first aid, and coffee making skills. And this will allow them to build confidence, develop valuable skills and explore new experiences. Because we wanted to empower the people who were attending the group. We do a lot of collaborative work within the community, so we collaborate across several different local authorities, including Stockport, Tameside and Rochdale, to deliver resident-driven projects. So we like to address things such as health, financial security, youth development and environmental well-being. We have a bank of volunteers, and we have about 52 volunteers across all the different ones I've just mentioned here. So they've donated over 7,000 hours, which has been a massive impact on the social value and how it can work and boost the community. So we're expecting to grow on that in the next coming year. So that is it from me. Happy to take any questions you might have, but my contact details are on there. And I'll be around this afternoon if you've got any questions. So Thank you for listening.
Sure, I will definitely pick you up for questions, Natalie. It was really interesting, and I think you've done a really great job of demonstrating the importance of the qualitative side of measuring social value, bringing to life focusing on the social in social value and the difference it makes to people, because it's incredibly profound. So that brings us nicely to the end of today's launch event. I just want to, before we go, pay tribute to everybody that's been involved in making today possible. So again, to thank the People's History Museum for hosting us, and also to Open Kitchen, which is a Manchester-based social enterprise, for providing the catering today. If you've not done so already, please do grab some nibbles on your way out. To all our wonderful speakers, to Sarah Lonlands, Sarah Griffiths, Matt Duran, and also Alice, thank you so much, and Natalie, of course, as well. Lastly, I just want to say a big thank you to guys at CLES, so Helen Power, David Birch, and also Dee Lowry and David Huddleston at Manchester City Council. It's your hard work that, first of all, has given us this report, but also made today possible. And it's the work that you do day in and day out that continues to push this agenda forward. So thank you for everything that you do. And thank you to us, everybody here and everybody online, for joining us today.